There you go. Hi, everyone. My name's Sam. I work with as a data engineer with a variety of projects, but mainly with Apache Spark. And we also use a variety of tools for workflow management, most of which now are in Airflow. And we quickly realized that there isn't really an industry standard for testing tools or testing your pipelines. So this Holden was really nice enough to organize a call to try and define how we want to test things, and that evolved into having a call about creating a library. So that's me. I'm a data engineer, and you're welcome to tell us more about yourselves.
I'll go next. I'm Scott. I've been a data engineer at Zapier for 7 weeks. So just getting my feet wet with Airflow still. And yeah, I'm on the call because we have a rat's nest of a DAG. And we keep deploying things and breaking things, and we need to stop doing that.
Cool. And I'm Arnie. I'm a software engineer that has traditionally been a full stack, but have been moving into the data space. Sorry, let me turn off my phone. So we're not at the stage yet where our DAGs are so big that we're not even in production yet, that we're breaking things, but we're trying to catch that sooner with the testing. So trying to get ahead of getting testing while we're developing our DAGs.
Well, I work with Arnie on the same project, so basically I'm just mirroring I just mirror what he said. As he said, like, we're trying to catch basically bugs and errors before we even enter production, and we're doing some manual testing on our own, basically trying to put like some tasks in between that test the results of our previous task, but I don't think that's going to be scalable. So yeah, we're pretty interested in the outcome of this call and what we might accomplish.
I can go next. My name is Laura. I work at a company called Industry Dive. We're pretty small, so do a lot of stuff, full stack web and data. We've been using Airflow in production for about like a year and a half now. And this email thread on the Airflow dev list was really timely for us because we just sort of implemented our own end-to-end like DAG testing framework that's sort of outside of Airflow, but is against Airflow. So have a little bit of that to share, and obviously I'm interested in getting that figured out since we're trying to figure it out ourselves anyway, so we can do it all together.
I can go next. So I work for Unbounce. I'm the team lead for the data operations group. This is actually my first role in data engineering, so it's a bit of a surprise. We've been sitting on a cloud platform that is crumbling. It runs a bunch of Spark jobs for us. We're moving our systems onto Airflow and moving on to getting off of that cloud platform. So we've been experimenting with DAGs, and we're sort of curious as to how to create interdependencies and how to test those. We've got individual testing on specific pipeline stages, but that's really sort of still new for us. And we're still trying to determine how to test more in terms of end-to-end and what that looks like for us. But given our stage, we're not in a great rush to get into it, but I would really like to sort of get ahead of the curve for the organization so we don't have to, scrape up 2 years of craft, 2 years down the road.
And I'm Holden. I work on Spark mostly, and I care about making sure that things people build with Spark are well tested because I don't want the software I work on to kill me. So making things that work with Spark like Luigi or Airflow actually be well tested is something that I obviously care about. Oh, and I'm at IBM. In our Spark Technology Center. So the work I do can be open source really easily, which is very nice.
Jane, you sort of joined the call a bit late, but we're sort of doing introductions, so feel free to tell us what you do and why you're on the call.
Sure. My name is Jane. I actually work with Arnie and Ollie over at Riot Games. I do QA, and we're just starting to learn Airflow, so I'm interested in all the testing that you guys are doing.
Okay. Well, I think a good way to start this is by talking about scenarios. It wasn't specifically Airflow based, but because everyone's using Airflow, I think, unless you disagree, Holden, we're sort of going to make it quite an Airflow specific discussion. We can talk about how we're doing testing right now and how ideally we'd like to do testing, and then move that on, and I guess talk a bit more to Laura about what exactly your testing library does, and if we can build upon it or build something new. So I'll start. So we don't have monster DAGs, but we've got about 20 or 30 really simple DAGs, but interconnected, and they depend on each other. And the pain we felt is because is basically we want our DAGs to run on different environments, and Airflow doesn't really help you run multiple pipelines in the same place. So we want to run dev, UAT, and potentially pre-prod on one Airflow server, and then production in a separate one. And how we wanted to do this is when we push a DAG to Git, we want to run that DAG and then assert on some of the results, all in CI with each commit. So how we've done it now is we've got multiple environments on S3. That's where our DAGs are. So you push a commit, and then we have a Jenkins build that syncs the Airflow DAGs from master to an environment, so whether UAT, dev, or integration tests. It then runs the DAGs themselves using a backfill, the backfill CLI, and then asserts on the results. But that really is us running the actual DAG. And it requires Airflow to be installed on the Jenkins server. So it feels hacky, and I'd very much like to have some sort of testing library to say, without mocking it, but some sort of testing library to say, here's a DAG, run it, and tell me the results are right without the need to install the entire Airflow ecosystem. I don't know if that's even possible, but that's hopefully what I want to do. I want to say point it to a DAG and say run it, and does it run successfully without the need to go into the UI. And at the moment, we're doing it by the backfill CLI command. So that's us. We're still able to run multiple DAGs. We're able to run multiple pipelines, but I guess if you give engineers any problem, they'll find a way to find a solution. It's not necessarily best practice, and I guess we're here to solve. If there isn't one, we'll create one with consensus. So that's me.
I can talk a little bit about what I was talking about on the Airflow dev list. So for us, we have a couple things going on, I guess, but we have a couple different DAGs that all run in Airflow. And then we just recently started a refactoring project. And so we wanted to have a good way that we could like basically call the stuff that's in the DAG and have it run end to end. And then if we knew the inputs, then we could compare the output from our DAG to an output that we know should work. And then we would also be happy because our refactor would be, we could, take a pulse on how it was going the whole time. So for us, I was trying to find just now what I was looking for in like the Airflow core tests where they have some examples where they're like setting up an executor in process. But for us, we actually went more the route of what you were saying you didn't like, but that we have the backfill job. I guess it's a little bit different. We're using, so the backfill CLI is like the CLI wrapper around the Python backfill job class. And so instead of like calling the CLI ourselves, we are inside our test case calling the backfill job like Python API and sending it like all the stuff. And so we have like a test scheduler running and a test metadata database running that those can use. So it is like using the whole like Airflow like stack and like the process is going. And then the use of the backfill job is that it's like it's in process until the whole DAG completes, as you probably also experience using the backfill CLI. So that was useful for us so that we could then like make our assertions at the end. And so, yeah, I didn't like, it's all sort of like wrapped up in like our proprietary stuff right now. So I would like to, and I didn't like have a lot of time to prepare yet for this, but I could definitely make sort of like a little example of what we did that's like sort of separated out, and then I can send that out and people can take a look. But, and I also right now will try and find this example that was in the Airflow like core test about how they had an executor in process, which was another route we could have gone down. And then I think we wouldn't necessarily need to have like the Airflow scheduler running, like a whole test stack of the Airflow scheduler running and the metadata database running for us to use the backfill job API. But it seemed a little fragile the way that like the tests were written, so I wasn't like totally sure. So that's why we went the other route. But let me see if I can find that. How many? Yeah, if anybody else wants to talk while I'm looking for this or has like some feelings, go for it.
Okay, well, while Laura's looking for that, does anyone want to share how they're doing testing at the moment and how they'd like to do testing? Because then this will help us sort of define a goal that we want to achieve by the end of this call, and what we'd like to at least be possible.
Cool. This is Arnie. I can talk about how we were planning and have started implementing some testing. So outside of Python unit tests, like the actual functional testing, we started creating tasks within our DAGs. So let's say there's one task where we need to put everything into a CSV file. After that task is complete, there's a task that's like verify that task has done what we expected it to do. And then each task that is what I guess I would say like functional, something that does something, there'd be a downstream task that tests it. And it won't continue until that task passes. So if any of the tests were to fail, then it wouldn't continue. It wouldn't be that comprehensive. Like I guess it'd be similar to like smoke testy, where we check like, hey, maybe counts of things, some types of things. Something that we haven't solved for yet that I would like to is the results of the test being like displayed to us. Like if something were to fail, looking outside of just the logs for that. So I think maybe like task instance details is somewhere we could look into this. But there is also us wanting to do after a complete run of the DAG, that whole thing completed successfully. So we haven't implemented yet, but have talked about having some test that wraps up at the very end that is more comprehensive than the steps in between. And ideally, what I would like is that we wouldn't have to have tests tasks like in between functional tasks within the DAG, but after having chatted around different options, this seemed the best way for us to at least start.
So inside of your test tasks, what kind of verification are you performing?
So far we've only created one of these, like as I said at the very early stage. So it's really basic, like count, um, coming from the count of what's in like the database that we're taking data in. Did we create the CSV with at least the right amount of things, and then do we at least have the field headers correct? And then we're going into the content. So if there is some content that was in the source, did that translate correctly to the CSV? Like were nulls handled correctly, for example? Did data values transfer over? So really, really basic stuff so far.
Actually, that's exactly what we're doing for testing. We are dealing with both CSVs and JSONs. We run the DAGs, and then we assert that the schema is generated. So in your case, field headers are correct. So we got the right number of columns. We got the right number of counts. That's our tests. But again, those are our unit tests rather than our DAG tests, because we sort of say we want to fail fast, and if there's a problem, if we make a change to the code that makes reading the CSVs fail, we don't want to wait till the DAG run to find out. We'd rather find out as soon as we commit and we run the build, because obviously the integration DAG tests take a bit longer than the unit tests. But that's a start. So ideally, we want our library to run a DAG, assert the results. So whether we check field headers or check counts, but we assert on something. So we need to define an assertion, and we need to point it to a DAG to start. So that's a really good start. Does anyone want to add anything?
So I'm wondering what sort of percentage of these would make sense to try and maybe provide templates for some of the rules that people are using for their verification. Because it seems like schema validation and simple amount of data invariance is something that's common across everyone's workflow. We could fairly easily provide some tools to allow inserting of those steps easily for other people into their pipelines. Does that seem like a reasonable thing we might want to do?
Seems very reasonable. Schema validation would be probably the first thing.
I'm wondering, Alden, you might know the answer to this, but does pandas, if we read in a data frame, will we be able to assert on the schema from it? Because pandas can read from CSV, JSON, and Parquet, probably Avro as well. So assuming we point it to the result of the DAG run, can we check? We can probably write something that checks the columns are in the right place, given an input, and then validate that schema.
Yeah, we can definitely assert the schema on a pandas data frame. There would possibly be some flakiness with certainly CSV files, because schema inference on CSV files is a little funky. But and also the other problem is, so pandas, for example, doesn't have a particularly great way of dealing with Parquet data, which I think might be something a lot of people are using. So unless we explicitly wrote out to a different format for tests, that might be kind of difficult.
I mean, it's sort of a questionable integration test if you're not using the scheme data format for input and output.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It actually looks like there's fast Parquet in Python, so it looks like I'm a little bit behind the times. So it might actually be reasonable to do this entirely with pandas, but I haven't played with fast Parquet yet to see where it breaks.
We're using fast Parquet right now. We haven't had any negative impacts on it yet, but I'm not an expert in that area.
Awesome. Well, I know that Spark Parquet files have a lot of interesting quirks to them, so it would be interesting to see how these quirks interact. But I think we could certainly code around whatever they are, if there are any.
I was like not listening all the way there while I was looking for this other thing, and it's too hard for me to do both at the same time, so I'm going to quit looking for the thing. But one thing I'm thinking about, for at least from our experience, something that needed to be figured out was how to basically configure that when we run the DAG in like test configuration, that it's like connecting to the test integration points. And for us, that integration point might be, we have like a test MySQL database process that we're like basically pushing data into for our ETL. But I think for other people, like they might need a test like Spark cluster that this test DAG needs to know to connect to, or whatever other random operators that they're using. Our library, or however we're plugging in, would need to know how to overwrite their configuration so that it was looking at the test configuration. And then everybody would also need to have like a test Spark cluster or test whatever cluster if they want to run the DAG all the way through, if they're using those types of operators or third-party services.
Yeah, that's definitely seems like a challenge that we're gonna have to face.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you require people to install Spark by default, whether having a Spark test cluster or not, it would sort of dissuade a lot of people saying, well, why do I need this? If I don't use Spark at all, why should I use this? Why should I create a Spark cluster to test my DAGs? Like ideally in my head, and feel free to correct me if it feels over-engineered and at all, but I'd like to install a package that has an in-memory bare Airflow setup. We point it to a DAG, or it knows where the DAGs is, and as Laura said, find a way to overwrite the configurations, or even pass it in as a file or YAML, because you can pass in Airflow configurations, I think, with the -e or -c parameter. So if we sort of tell people that if you write your DAGs in this way to make it configurable, you could use our library to overwrite some of your config variables, and whether you want to point it to a Spark cluster or not, you can use that. So my idea is you download a Python package. It comes pre-packaged with things that can read CSVs, JSONs, which is your input or output, and then asserts on counts and schema. Like that's like the very bare metal library. How does that sound?
I just want to add on the just it seems you're taking notes for like the idea library. For when you make the asserts, I would like a way to see the results easily. So to see what has failed, where it's failed, and why, without having like dig too deep into the tasks.
Yeah, I think for what we made, we have basically, so since we have MySQL, so again, like for our case, we have a, we subclass from unit test case to create something that knows about a MySQL hook, which like an Airflow MySQL hook, and we like overwrite its configuration at test time so that it will like connect to our test MySQL process instead. And then we use nose tests to run those tests. And at the end of the test, it like compares, like string compares two files. So it doesn't even like read CSV or check schema necessarily. It's like this file should look exactly like that file, and like straight up just compares the two strings right now. But so yeah, so then the benefit for this for us is then we get normal like nose tests, like test output. We get the tracebacks at, well, we get the tracebacks at the assertion that failed, as like you might expect. One weird thing that happens too is that the Airflow like worker logs have their tracebacks separately also, depending on where the exception got thrown. But again, maybe if I put my examples together, this might be a little bit more concrete, but so that you guys can actually read it. But yeah, basically to say, I think that what our package might include is these like unit test subclasses, basically, that like very concretely, it might have those that people might use for their normal testing, and then they can use their test runner, nose test, or whatever that will run their end-to-end tests along with the rest of their testing suite, and then they'll get their like tracebacks in line or whatever. So I think that might be a implementation route we could take if we wanted.
Okay, so far I've got in-memory DAG runner, asserts on schema and counts, and visualize failures. How we're tackling visualizing failures now is really bad. we are loading up the logs. We don't even have a log shipper, I don't think, at the moment, because when you run the backfill via the CLI, it doesn't actually tell you what failed on the, it just tells you what task failed on the CI server. It doesn't tell you why it failed because the logs are separate to the backfill. The backfill doesn't actually tell you, doesn't read the logs as far as I'm aware. So we need a way to at least visualize these failures or load the logs while the test is running, depending on your log level.
Yeah, basically our problem, I'm remembering now, if the failure was like an assertion error, then we would get our traceback in line where we would expect. If the failure was inside the worker because something in the task failed, then that data, as you're mentioning, would be in the that traceback would be in the worker logs, and right in any sort of fancy way that surfaces that in the output from nose tests. You would have to go read the worker logs, and like on our CI, we like mount those worker logs as like an artifact so that like if someone wanted to see what was up, they could go see there. But the only way they know how to go look at that is A, because humans told them, and B, because the traceback from backfill was like a vanilla Airflow exception. And so they're like, this isn't helpful. And then they go look at the worker logs, which is not great. So yeah, that is something we experience too.
Okay, so I think we have a good idea of what we want to achieve. Now for the easy bit, how? Where do we even start tackling this? If we want to have an in-memory, Airflow runner, I mean, I don't even know where to start with this, to be honest.
Well, I think that we would need to take a look at Airflow's local executor, which is a scheduler that, let's see, there's local executor, sequential executor, and celery executor. And I think local executor is, local and sequential are both like a single process. And so if we could like instantiate one of those in our test process, then we could get a handle on a in-memory like front of our test process executor. But that was like a route we didn't go down because it seemed hard originally. So like, but we started out looking at that to see if we could use that so that we wouldn't have like the worker log somewhere else problem, or that we weren't depending on this backfill job API in a way that it wasn't really intended to be used. So we may want to like dig a little bit more into how those schedulers classes are defined. And again, if I can find whatever I was looking at before, I remember reading in an Airflow core test somewhere an example where they like instantiated the executor as part of the test as opposed to like using an outside one, but I really can't do two things at once. So I'll put that on my list of to-dos.
It's okay. Okay, so we want to instantiate a local executor, point it to a DAG. And assert on the result. Okay. So I guess the first step is to try and instantiate a local executor. That's the very first hello world for us, isn't it? If we can instantiate a local executor within a test, and then I don't even know if we do an Airflow version, maybe after we instantiate it, get it to return successfully. That would be our first goal. We can look at the other two later on. Does that sound achievable?
Yeah, and I think between now and then, or like in the next couple of days, I can put together what we had come up with in a sort of like separate world so people can look. So that, yeah, in case that's helpful, or you guys can do it and be like, this sucks, let's do something else. But at least then we'll have something like concrete to say yes or no to.
Right? You've got to start rather than like abstract.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay. How does that sound, everyone?
That does sound good. I'm curious are we going to use the mailing list as a main form of communication, or should we use like Gitter, Slack, anything more real time?
Yeah, I'm for anything that's not email.
Same.
I will be the lone voice for email, but that's okay. I'm fine with whatever everyone else does.
Yeah, I think a Slack channel would work if everyone's okay with that.
I think the only downside is taking the discussion out of the existing group, because if people don't see it moving, they won't realize what's going on.
Well, I think also possibly where I'll put some of this stuff, like if we're thinking of this as being, I don't know what the rules are about this, but we can like make some space on the Airflow Confluence, I imagine, that is like related to this. So, because I've like edited the Confluence wiki once to like put some links. So maybe we could also like store some of our stuff there if people have, like, you can get an Airflow Confluence login, and then we could have like a place to put our stuff. Though we may want to have like real-time chat as well, but then that might be a place where we could like keep stuff together. So that's a thought. I don't really know what the rules are, but I know that I edited the Confluence one time, so I feel like it's a thing.
Okay, so Laura's the wiki person, right? Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll create a Gitter channel unless people prefer Slack. I'll also send it via email on a thread. So we've got that existing. My worry is then that people have two places to check things. And that's even worse, right? Might as well create Jira as well. So fine, we can start with email to start off with. Just because we don't have anything concrete. Once we start committing code, I guess we can move to Slack or Gitter. Unless, is everyone happy with that?
Yeah, I think
That's a good start.
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll create a repo. Send you all guys a link to it, and then hopefully we can try and create a in-memory Airflow Hello World test.
Okay, yeah.
And Laura, if you get a chance, if you reply to the email that I'll send saying, here's the links, then we'll be able to sort of help, because like I don't even know where to start, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I might actually, like, on the repo that you make, I can sort of like basically commit a like vanilla version of that code like on a branch there, and then we would also have sort of like the basic setup like folder structure wise that we could like build off of too, because I would have like a DAGs folder, and then I would have like a folder that has my like my unit test subclasses. And so if we decide to go that route, then like there's something there. So yeah, if you make that, then I can put it in there so that it's easier to see.
That's perfect. All right, I'll send everyone the GitHub repo link, and I'll put a README to say what we're trying to achieve. And if you guys all share it, please, because, you know, the more ideas or the more eyes we have this, the better.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
A very good night, good morning, and good afternoon.